Hey, welcome back. Today in this video I'm going to be finishing up another Journeyman Smith knife for the 2018 Blade Show. This is an integral chef's knife, this time with a Madagascar rosewood handle, also known as violet wood. It's a very, very rare rosewood, super cool. I'm going to be taking you through a more detailed process this time of how I finish this knife handle. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is trace out my handle shape. This is already glued up. I've traced out where my tang roughly is, but it's obviously still just a block, so we need to trim off some excess. Everything usually flows downwards and creates an S shape. That's the most natural and aesthetically pleasing shape. I'm also going to measure the overall length of the handle because I found that typical handle lengths are around 4.5 inches. It can be larger, it can be a little bit smaller, but for this chef's knife, I'm going to do 4.5. So all this is excess. I put 2 to 3 fingers up here to see the distance of this first part of the handle. So I almost always freehand my stuff, or sometimes I don't draw at all. I just grind to it. For some reason, it's easier for me to grind and forge to shape than it is to draw and plan out. Whenever I try to plan out things, it usually ends up worse than if I just wing it. So that's just how I operate. If you're the type of person that likes to draw on paper, then it might be best for you to plan this out ahead of time. After that profile is cut in, I'm going to go ahead and take the height gauge and scribe a center line right down the center all the way across the handle. The next thing I'm going to do is start sculpting the handle. Right now, everything is square, everything's in line, and we don't need to take any more measurements. Once I start grinding this bolster down and sculpting the handle, no measurements can be taken off of this knife anymore because everything is tapered. There are no flat spots on the knife. Without flat spots, you can't really take good measurements. So make sure that everything is right up to this point. Once you start grinding into it, that's it. Today I'm going to be showing you how I sculpt a knife handle. This is a technique that is not really common. It's one that I've just sort of developed. I'm sure that other people do it as well, but like I said, it's not as common. When you're sculpting an ergonomic knife handle like this, typically you use contact wheels of different sizes. So this is a 5-inch, I have an 8-inch, I also have a 16-inch wheel. That is an easier method, but I also think that it's slower and it limits you to what shapes you can make. For example, I have a tight curve here, whereas if I've got like a big Bowie knife handle, this curve probably fits a 2-inch wheel or maybe even a 5-inch wheel. And to get these different radiuses, you have to change out wheels. Whereas the technique that I'm going to be using only involves a flat platen, so you have one tool. The downside of the technique is that it is definitely a lot harder. It's got a bigger learning curve to it. But once you get it down, it's really easy. So I've gotten asked a few times by personal knife maker friends of mine to do a video on my technique of sculpting a knife handle just because it's a little bit tricky to pick up. So I want to go in depth with this. Basically it involves using the edge of the flat platen, just like grinding a recurve knife if you're familiar with that. So to get into these curves, I have to grind at an angle on the edge of this flat platen and then adjust my angle as I go along. Of course, if I were to grind flat like this, I can't get contours. I want to swell here, I want it to dip in here and then curve in there. So by changing the angle on the flat platen, I'm able to get an unlimited amount of curves, radiuses, whereas like I said earlier, if I'm using a wheel, I'm limited to the radius or diameter of that wheel. This is a much more versatile method. This first step is actually the easy step. It's just taking that entire surface area of the flat platen and rounding over the edges of the first half of the knife. So I break it down by first working on this front section of the handle, rounding it over. Now I'm going to get to the second half of the handle, which is where the more difficult grinding comes into play. For this next part, I'm going to use a 60 grit belt. I'm going to come in on the edge of the platen at about a 30-degree angle or so, and that angle will actually change depending on your knife handle, and you'll just get an eye for it after a while to where you can shape any handle that you need to. So I'm going to come in, dig in, scoop in, and then kind of rotate as I come up, and then pull away without grinding the edge of this wood off, because I want a nice palm swell butt of a knife at the end here. So I'm going to take passes, take a cut, look at it, take a cut at a different angle, maybe more shallow, and then one at a more aggressive angle, and we're going to round this in. It'll happen really quickly, so pay attention as I go along. that was the bulk of the sculpting right there. It takes me just a matter of 1 to 2 minutes to actually knock out the bulk of that material. And all I need to do from here with that flat platen is connect this ridge line. You see I've left a little bit of material there. So I'm just going to round this over, which is really simple. And then do the same thing in here. Just connect those together. After that roughing out is done on the edge of the platen, we're going to go to a slack belt. So I'll go straight from 60 grit to 320 grit. Depending on the type of the knife, this actually finishes the knife. So on this, I'm not actually going to do as much slack belting. I'm just going to do a little bit in this section here to smooth it out, and then I'm going to start on hand tools. If I was doing a full tang knife without an integral bolster like this, say micarta scales, then I would simply do what you just saw me do, 60 grit, rough it out, and I'll go straight to a 320 grit slack belt and be done. I've timed myself doing this on one of my Jaegers, 5 minutes to do a handle that's a block, glued up with pins sticking out, to a completely finished handle. That's how fast this process is. And like I was mentioning earlier, the main benefit of this, aside from the speed, is that you only use one tool. So if you have this flat platen, which you will if you own a 2x72 grinder, all you have to do is unbolt this, and then you have a slack belt. Now for me, just to save time, I have a whole separate arm for slack belting, so I don't have to change out that platen. So now I've got a slack belt, put a 320 grit J-Flex belt on there. And we'll get to grinding. Okay, so that is it for roughing out a knife handle. Sculpting an ergonomic handle, as you can see, it's got all the curves that we need. I only used one tool. It takes a matter of minutes. Depending on the type of knife handle, depends on how far you take each step. So for example, like I said just a minute ago actually, on this type of handle, I don't do as much slack belting. I do more hand filing, just because it's got an integral bolster and it's a wooden material. If I'm doing a stock removal knife or a knife with a micarta handle, it's much easier. I do the 60 grit rough grind, I go straight to the 320 grit slack belt, I slack belt everything, and it's done. It takes a matter of minutes. So work on practicing this. It's all about controlling how far you dig into the material. It just takes practice. If you've already got experience grinding recurve knives, this is a whole lot easier. So something to work on. After a while, everything becomes faster. It's a more versatile method. If you have any comments about what I just talked about, feel free to put them in the comments section below and I'll try to address them. And if you found this video informational and enjoyed it, It helps us out a lot if you like and comment, and especially share with your friends. Check out earlier videos in my channel to see more stuff like this. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.